Wai au, ko Maree Sheehan taku ingoa Ngāti Maniapoto Waikato, Ngāti Tūwharetoa, Ngāti Tau, Ngāti Whaua. I did my PhD at AUT in what they call audio portraiture. So it was called Sound Identity, exploring the multi-dimensionalities of wahine Māori through audio portraiture. So it was very much a rangahau or research on creative practice and how that creative practice is centralized in the way that I created audio portraiture. So I hope to, I'm going to go to the next slide, please, Heidi. Thank you. Okay. Am I doing that or are you doing that, Heidi? Kapai, thank you. Sorry, we're just going to have to go through this a little bit, unfortunately, Whānau, because it wasn't coming off my computer. So sorry about the technical. And thank you, Heidi, for helping me do this. So my supervisor was Professor Welby Ings, and he's actually from Ngāti Maniapoto. And he was really instrumental in helping me think about how I was going to look at my artistic practice, but from from an academic way of doing research. And these are some of the quotes that he has said, you know, for a lot of us who are artists, making is a way of thinking, and their creativity is not separate from intellect. And this is the process of like whether you're a weaver, you're a designer, a composer, a performer. It's actually the process of actually knowing. It's what we call tacit learning. And that knowledge lives within us, in our hands, in our body, in our wairua, not just in the written text. And as he said here, we don't just illustrate those ideas, we discover them through the act of creating. So if I can go to the next slide, please, Heidi. So when we're looking at practice-led or practice-based research, when we're looking at creative practice-led or practice-based research, these are a couple of things that are really important to think about. Research where the artistic practice, whatever it is that you're doing, that you're creating, drives the research questions and outcomes. And the focus is on how practice, or the creative practice, produces new understandings. See, I didn't really know that. I'd come from a little bit of a slightly from an academic background from the master's going into the PhD. I thought when I started my PhD that I had to have all of my literature review done. I had to have a very, very clear understanding of all of that. I had to have contextual review and I had to have that kind of written before I actually did my practice. What Welby taught me and what many of you that are going into research is that the practice of it in and of itself, their creativity, is actually what draws in the understandings. So as you're making and doing and creating, you're then thinking, okay, well, what is this that I'm doing? What is it that's of interest to me? And then who else out there do I want to look at that's doing something similar to me? And that can be everything from your kaumātua, your kuia, your whānau, your hapu, your iwi, but also from those artists or mentors that you intrinsically love about the practice that you're doing. And that's the difference, I suppose, in practice-led and practice-based research, is that it's the act of doing their creativity that draws in the rangahau, that draws in the integration of your thinking and of your making. So if we could please go to the next slide. So we look at this practice-led and practice-based rangahau. So some of the key characteristics here that when we're looking at practice-based and practice-led rangahau is that The Rangahau, and according to Tuhiwai Smith, and I'm sure that I hope that Morihu would agree with me on this, is that it's grounded in whakapapa. It's grounded in your genealogy. It's grounded in whanaungatanga and those relationships that you have. It also seeks to uplift Māori communities, to protect tapu and mana, and it values wairua and spiritual connections and mauri and that tikanga or the protocols of how you would respond in those relationships when you are doing rangahau. It often includes things like pūrākau, kōrero tuku iho, wānanga, and creative practices. And this is probably a lot of the difference between rangahau and research. What we value as in a Māori worldview are those things, and they play a significant part in how we create the materials that we create, things that we engage in when we're doing practice-led and practice-based rangahau. If we could go to the next slide, please, Heidi. Often we're asked when we're doing practice-based or artistic-based research, or any type of rangahau or research, is why? Why? What's the rationale and the significance? What is it? What is it that you are creating as an artist? So, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you can't wait to make? For me, it's about music and sound, but for others, it could be weaving, it could be painting, it could be anything where you're ignited to want to make something that you feel really passionate about. So you're creating something, it could be writing, could be anything. This is the difference. But in everything that we do, there's always a what is it that you're doing and why are you doing it? Now, those that may sound like really basic questions, but they are the fundamental parts of why you'll be asked to look at when you're actually doing rangahau. So I want to take a moment for you to have a look at this slide. And these are some of the questions that I want you to think about. Why is rangahau important to you? So if you can get your pen and a piece of paper, and it doesn't have to be, I just want you to think about two questions. What is it that you'd want to create or do if you were doing practice-led rangahau? Why would you want to do that? So what's the kaupapa? What's the meaning behind it? And the what is, what do you feel passionate about? What do you feel passionate about creating? What ignites you? What uplifts you? What is it that you can't not do without when it comes to creating? So let's take a moment to do that. I was going to play you a waiata, but I can't because I haven't got my PowerPoint. But let's take a moment, and I just want you to write that down. And while you're thinking about that, when I've spoken to other people that are doing and have been doing artistic research or rangahau, they often talk to me and say that it is for their iwi, their hapu. It's often the whānau, that connection to their whānau. Often it's something to do with the Māori or communities that they work in. Those are the types of things that really bring about passion in the things that they're doing or creating or looking at. So I hope now that you've got your kind of maybe a sentence of what it is. Dream, people. About being creative is also about dreaming. So feel free to put down on your piece of paper what your dreams and hopes and aspirations are. Dream big. Don't limit it. But I hope that in your spirit, in your wairua, you've got your what and you've got your why. Because when you've got those two things, that's your rationale and significance. And those are just words, really. Rationale and significance is your what and your why. And those things are really the most crucial principles of what propels you into your research, what keeps you dedicated and passionate about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. When you're doing a PhD, as I'm sure that many people like Shelley and Marama can attest to, there comes times in your years of doing your PhD when you think, why am I doing this? Those nights when you're writing, those nights where you're making something, it's just not quite hitting the mark. Come back to these principles. What is it that you feel passionate about, and why do you want to be doing this? Often, for most of us, it's not just about ourselves, it's often about the people that we love and care about, and we want to make a difference in the world. So hang on to that. Those are a couple of principles that I would say keep us going in those times where it can get often a little bit difficult. If we could go to the next slide, please, Heidi. Oh, sorry, the next slide. That was going to be my lovely music that I was going to play you, but hey, aha. So when it comes to creative practice-led or practice-based research, there are two elements that happen when you're doing Rangahau. One is obviously the written exegesis. Now that's the part that you are often writing about what you're doing, thinking about what you're doing, analysing what you're doing, and you're writing about it. And the other part of it is your actual artifact, the body of practice. So when you're a creator, it could be the beginnings of a kite, the process of making that to the final artifact done and dusted. So it's that process of making. The difference, I suppose, is that the practice leads you in the research. So when you're making something, things come to us. We learn while we're making. And those, when you're actually doing it as rangahau, you're writing about those processes. You're thinking about those processes as you're doing. The difference, I suppose, is that often when you're a creator, you often just do. I don't know about you, but I often just make stuff. I often just make music, or I'll go out there and do things. But I don't often, I do now, but I never really thought about what I was doing. When you're doing rangahau in this type of environment, you are asked to think about what it is you're doing. What are your processes? How do you start things? How do you finish things? How do you make things? So it's always good to think about that when you're making something. So if we look at here, the practice-led thesis and therefore is concerned with the nature of practice that leads to knowledge. And by practice-led inquiry, this refers to the process of iterative development that occurs through conceptual and material thinking. Iterative process, you might hear this word when you're doing practice-led and practice-based rangahau. Iterative means just making something and then remaking something and then remaking something and developing that idea. That's what iterative means. And often we do that as creators. We'll make something, we might think, oh, that's okay, we might throw it away, we might make something else, we might expand on it. That's what we're talking about, iterative development. We could go to the next slide, please. So when we're looking at approaches, there's two approaches that I just spoke about. One is the conceptual thinking, and these are some of the things that, not sure what's happening down there. He āhua whakaaro kei te rangi, thinking that exists in the realm of ideas, wairua, and theory. So these things are quite different from how maybe a westernized way of doing research might be looked upon. For Māori, well, for me, I can't speak for every Māori, but for me, it's a holistic journey. You know, te ao Māori and the Māori worldview includes for me hinengaro, the tinana, the wairua, um, all aspects of us holistically. And as creators, we bring that to our rangahau. Some of those key aspects when we're thinking about approaches to conceptual thinking, when we're thinking about, when you're a creator, you're trying to make something. Some of the things we've got here, some of the concepts here is te tinana me te taiao. It's rooted in the interaction with the environment and materials. Some of you might be doing that as weavers. Ako mā te mahi, so learning through the process and trial and iteration. So like I said, we trial things, we make things, we do that again, and we develop it. Okay, so that's a process. That's a way of conceptually thinking about things. Kōrero tuku iho is very important, an embodiment of an ancestral knowledge. So that ancestral knowledge that we have inside us from our tupuna, from our iwi, from our hapu, from our relationships, all reside within us and are a part of how we create. So that's also really important. And then he hono ki te whenua. So as Māori, we're grounded in whakapapa and we're grounded in the connection to our whenua. And we bring that with us when we think about conceptual ideas and creative practice. If we could go to the next slide, Heidi. Thank you very much. These are some of the examples that I just spoke about now. Have a quick look at that. And then let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So materiality, you might hear a word called materiality. I really understood what that word really meant, but I know that people were using it when it came to creative practice. Material thinking, whakaroa tinana. So for us, or for me, that's about that tacit knowledge as Māori. Tacit knowledge is that knowledge that is gained through experience, intuition, our wairua, practices, our expression, our language, all those things that we're brought up with from when we're born to how we are today is what we call tacit knowledge. And that knowledge resides within us. That knowledge is what we can draw upon to make creative artefacts. It's something that we know and intrinsically know within our culture, and it comes out through, as an approach to our practice-led research or practice-based research. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Some of the things that you might see in doing possibly a master's or even a PhD or even in your own thinking when it comes to rangahau is the integration of creative practice in the research. And that's the difference. What we're talking about here today is how do we take our creative artistic practice and how do we then integrate that into rangahau or research and vice versa. And you might see some of these things when you're looking at doing a master's or you're doing a PhD. For some of us, when we look at this, we might go, I don't know if I understand that. I'm not sure what that means. But let me make this a little bit easier for you. If we could go to the next slide. Sorry, next. Yep, great. We look at introduction. To me, that's about your inspiration, your engagement, and your creative spirit. That's what we want to hear you talk about when you're doing creative-based or creative-led rangahau. What inspires you? Why are you doing this? What's your creative spirit about? When they say talk about positioning the researcher, what they're really asking you is, who are you? Wai'o. What is the connection to yourself? What is your identity? Where do you come from? Who is your whānau? What is your whakapapa? All those things that really are important to who we are and gives us an understanding of who you are and why it is that you create something. The next one is your creative practice. Well, actually, no, sorry. The next one is your what they call contextual review. Contextual review or literature review really comes down to in practice letters what inspires you and who inspires you creatively. So for me, I would have to say that my tupuna have been a part of my inspiration for creating. My whānau, a part of who inspire me to create. But I also have mentors like, say, like Nina Simone, who's an amazing jazz singer. Now, she inspired me creatively as well. Mana wahine inspire me. Um, So I draw on these things. Rather than going out there and doing a full literature review on a creative practice, what we're trying to do in the integration of creative practice and research is actually figure out for you who inspires you creatively, and then you draw that knowledge in to your practice. So when I don't know, when you could be weaving a kite or a korowai, and you might be thinking of Digaris the Kanoa, and you might think, ah, she inspires me. I love her, I love her mahi toi. I'm going to then go and look at some rangahau about her and how she did things. Rather than the other way round, often in Western institutions, you're expected to go out and have the contextual review done before you do the practice. In this, the practice leads you always to what inspires you and what research and context is important to what your creative practice is. Often they talk about methodology and methods. In a creative practice, that's once again, how do you create? What is it that you start with? What's in the middle while you're making things? And then how do you finish off a product or off an artifact? When I say artifact, that's the final thing that you're making, whether that be pottery or whether that be korowai or whether it be a song. And then when you're doing the difference between doing rangahau in a creative practice is that you often just, like I said before, you often just make things, but you don't always analyze what it is that you're doing. When you're doing research, in this area, you're expected to have a better understanding or think into how it is that you do things. That's really what it comes down to. What's your process? How do you start something? What is it you do? Do you make something, then you throw it away and then you develop it more? Do you go back to it? Do you start again? What is it that you do in your process? And then you've obviously the analysis or the critical commentary really means you need to talk and write about that. You need to tell us when you're doing creative practice, what is it that you learned? What were your challenges? What did you not know about yourself? What did you not know about your practice? What were the great things that you learned about your practice? What did you learn while doing your practice? Did you do, if you do more of it, did you get better at it? Why did you get better at it? So that's all that why, but it's that writing and talking and thinking about it, that analysis of what you do in your creative practice. And then lastly, obviously, summary and conclusion is the same as everyone else. You're just giving the audience, I suppose, a chance to kind of really affirm what it is that you do as a artist, but what you do as a researcher. Thank you, Heidi. If we could go to the next. So here's an example of my PhD research design. And this, like I said, was looking at how did I create audio portraiture of mana wahine. The overarching part of it for me was that it was located in kaupapa Māori. So the way that I was going about my interviews with wahine Māori or collecting sound data was always based on that kaupapa Māori methodologies. It also had a very, very strong overarching paradigm of mana wahine because I was mana wahine, I was interested in mana wahine, and the audio portraits or the portraits that I were doing were all mana wahine. So I needed to draw in that kind of knowledge, and that was my overarching paradigm. Within that, as you can see, it was an artistic inquiry. So it's what we're talking about today. It was based on how did I utilize my practice as an artist to create audio portraiture. I also used in the middle a thing called reflective practice, which is often, sometimes as artists, we don't always do. But reflective practice is that moment where you've made something and then you actually take the time to reflect back on it. As creators, like I said, often we just make the thing and we don't actually reflect on it. When you're doing Rangahau at master's or PhD level, you're often asked to reflect. And reflective practice is a methodology. It's one that I use to then figure out what was I doing, how was I going about it, and what did I learn from it, and what were some of the challenges. That's the part of the reflective practice. And under that, you see my methods. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Heidi. These are the types of methods that I use to actually make the audio portrait. And these might be something that may help you, but as it gives you an example of how I reflected on my creative practice and then was able to say, oh, these are actually the methods that I use. So I use this method called, well, it's not a method, it's just part of who I am. It's called indwelling. And as artist, for me, that's about being within that whole moments of when you have that silence. Well, for me, I have that silence. So I actually can be driving the car, or I can be sitting around and I'll have an idea that just comes to me because I'm just kind of dwelling. And that idea will then sit within my body, within my tinana and my wairua, and it will dwell there. And it will be that spark or that ignition. And that's I think about things a lot when I'm creating before I actually do any practice. And that part is a really important part was a really important part for my creative journey because that was part of my happiness. Part of my happiness in creating was actually having that time to dwell, time to think, to imagine, to wonder about the thing that I was going to make. So that was a really important part of my creative process. And often sometimes we don't always articulate that. We often as creators don't always go, oh, that's actually a part of what I do. But for many of us, it really is a part of how we create. We have that ignition and that spark of passion, and it sits within us. For me, often before I engaged with the wahine that I was doing audio portraits with, karakia was really a really important part. And it wasn't a part that I did necessarily with them. Sometimes I did, but it was my part of my process. I always did karakia before, and still do karakia if I'm about to engage in something that I feel is a relationship or a connection to another person, but also connection to atua for me. That's me. That may not be part of how you do things, but I always give thanks, and lots of people have asked me, where do you get your creative inspiration from? How do you make things? How do you do things? And I always give thanks to the atua. I give thanks to tupuna, and I give thanks to the universe for igniting my creative spirit. And I tend to do that as my process before I engage with creating. Just that's me. Yours might be different, but these are just examples. Obviously, stage two or phase two in Rangahau or creative practice for me was about data gathering. So, and these relate very much to kaupapa Māori methodologies. It's that kanohi ki te kanohi, and that interweaving of kōrero, of spirit, of mauri, of sharing, um, in order to create the audio portraiture. I needed to be able to do that, which is always a part of what I like to do. The sound recordings were also part of that. So that's being on the whenua, connecting to their whenua, connecting to their whakapapa, and being able to record that. And then obviously archival material. So some of this may or may not work for you, but this is what I did. And then stage three of the data processing was that immersion. So I gathered all this kind of material, which you might do. Also, I see it as a collage, but it was in sound, and that was my palette, you know. And then I sat with it. As creators, we make things. We have to sit. We have to be immersed in it in order to move it to the next stage. So that immersion, which is for me similar to the indwelling, but I was then, rather than indwelling being of myself, it was immersion was about being immersed in the material, in the materialities that I was thinking about, feeling, understanding. So that took that's a really big part of my creative practice is immersion. The other part that may or may not resonate with you, but I have this thing called flow. So I don't know if you're creators, but when you're in the flow and you're getting what I call the downloads of creative inspiration, and you're just like, whoa, I'm in it. And you just love it and you're passionate about it and hours and time just goes, right? When you're making things that you're really passionate about. I call this the flow. That was my flow. Sometimes I'd have like awesome flow. I'd be like, yes, I'm inspired. And within that flow, uh, which is like iterative development, I suppose, I would be doing audio, I'd be doing sketches, which would then sometimes move into more drafts. And then finally, I would be comparing things. I'd be going, oh, you know, is this soundbite better than this? Or is this lyric better than this one? Or uh, is what say Moana said here better than what she said here? Um, does this connect to what I'm feeling? Wairua, does this connect to the modi that I'm feeling within my creative practice? So that was kind of like a flow. And those are three ways that I did it through sketching, drafting out, and then what we call hypothesis testing. So comparing things. And then lastly, in the stage of data processing was the critiquing and feedback. So when I finished, say, a draft of something that I thought was a good draft, that I was quite happy with, I often had a couple of people that I would send that to listen and get their feedback or their critique, just to make sure what it was that what I was trying to do was give over an audio portrait that embodied the wairua of that person, but also the modi of that person. Did the people that were critiquing this particular audio portrait, could they feel that when they listened to it? Was what what I was thinking was a connection? Was that true? And I needed other people to give me that feedback in order to know that I was on the right track. Um, because sometimes you can, as a creator, you can go way out there and and then uh, you're not actually putting the message that you actually want to do. or you want to embody, or you want the audience to feel or sense. So that was a really important part for me in terms of critiquing and feedback. If we could go to the next slide, please, Heidi. So here's 3 different quotes that I got from 3 awesome people in the world. Well, Nina Simone's not in this Albert, or neither is Albert, but Ngahui is certainly with us. And these resonated with me. Have a read of those. I think sometimes as artists, or even as researchers, we don't always think what we do or have been doing is actually rangahau, where in actual fact it really is. For me, when I started my PhD, I didn't think that I necessarily, my creative practice would be a PhD. It was just something that I did, something I loved to do. And yes, it had lots of different connections, lots of different things, but I didn't know and realize. So for many of you that are creators, are writers, are researchers, think about these quotes and understand that what you have inside of you as your creativity is an intelligence, is a rangahau, is research. It's just how we package that together. And if I go back to my other slides, it's like, when they talk about rationale and significance, that really is only the what and the why. We talk about positioning the researcher, that's really only about who are you. So don't be scared to engage if you want to engage in your creative practice as rangahau or research. It's all that tacit learning that you have within yourself. It's all that connection to your tupuna, iwi, your hapu. That's all part of what is intrinsically within us when we look at creative leading, creative practice, rangahau and research. So that's me. I think we've got time for some questions, and ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Thank you once again, Heidi, for looking after the slides for me today, and also to Matua Dobby once again, ngā mihi ki a koe mō tō karakia wātia. Tēnā koutou katoa. I love those. Any pātai whānau?
Just to say that was awesome, Maree. And my true passion is to become a potter. So I'm just thinking about how do I completely reframe my work to move away from urban issues to ceramics. So yeah, that's given me a lot to think about.
Follow that, Becky. Follow that wairua, that ignition of creativity.
Yes, awesome. That was very cool. Thank you, Ella.
Welcome.
Tēnei hoki te tuku mihi ki a koe Maree, I te rawe o tō kouwhau. He pātai tāku. When you're doing he mahi ngātahi, a collaborative practice, they're kind of ground rules or things, because everyone will have a different way of working together. Yeah, I tehi āhuatanga o te rangi.
Tēnā koe te mihinga mō tō pāpai. Oof. Collaboration is another lecture. But okay, so there's different ways. So as an artist, in artistic practice, I think it's similar to, those methodologies, those kaupapa Māori methodologies. And I think if you're going to be collaborating with somebody, you need to set the ground rules to start with, so that whole about respecting each other's mahi in terms of who contributes what, how they contribute, how you communicate about that. It's really always very, very important. I think, those are the main things. Like respect, mana, manaakitanga, and that truth. So if you set down those kinds of foundations prior to actually collaborating, I think that can set you in a really good way. I think having that is a good thing. In terms of collaborative PhDs, artistic collaborative PhDs, I only know of one recently with those three weavers from three Maniapoto weavers, and I've forgotten their names, but they did a collaborative PhD at AUT. They would be actually amazing to speak to about how they actually did that. In fact, their PhD would be a really, really awesome way. But I know that in terms of PhD and masters, it's not often that you have two people come together and do it together. I'm not saying that you can't, but it's not usual practice to do that, interestingly enough. Maybe we should be pushing the boundaries out on that.
Yeah, tēnā. Bisa he pata kei te chat.
Bye.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's part idea. Masua Dobby said because we have Gloria, Rose and Jackie that did their Rāranga PhD. Yeah.
Together.
Can you see the chat, Maree?
Yes. Okay, I'm just going back. Oh, I'm going right back to the beginning now. Sorry, I haven't seen this. Too busy talking, eh?
Christina asks, how does postgrad fit into Rangahau?
Becky?
How does Rangahau fit into postgrad?
No.
If you're meaning the postgrad degrees, ideally they're a central part of them, because the thing about postgraduate study is you're then on a journey of finding out stuff. You're on your own journey of exploring and interpreting and so on, as opposed to an undergraduate degree, which is a little bit more people telling you stuff, So there's a sort of quite a big shift, I think, when you go into postgraduate study. That should be a little bit more about you having agency, you leading the way and exploring kaupapa that is important to you and that ignites your wairua, as Maree was talking about. So yeah, that's how I would think about postgraduate study. Yeah, hopefully that's what you meant.
See, Tara has a question. What do you see as the future or potential of creative rangahau at Te Wānanga Aotearoa? What the great thing about Te Wānanga Aotearoa is that they already have a beautiful master's program now, Te Wakahiringa, where many of the tauira are doing practice-led, practice-based rangahau. And some of the comments that I got back from, kōrero that I had with Whaiatarita Papich, who's, one of the leaders of that masters, is that creative practice at rangahau is very different for our tauira than what it is when we go into Western institutions. So that whole connection to the holistic person, our wairua, our mauri, our tacit learning, all the things that they bring with them is valued, is seen as empirical, important knowledge to what they do as creators. It is uplifted within their masters. And from there, I can see, the hope is that we will then be placing that into PhD. We're working on that at the moment. So I see creative rangahau and the potential of that at Te Wānanga Aotearoa as being something that's we will be leaders, global leaders within that. And for us, when you think about just creative minds, why would you do a creative practice-led rangahau PhD or masters? It's because creative minds globally, no matter where you come from, is ways of being able to problem solve, it's ways of being able to give back to your whānau, it's ways of being able to be in the world. It has many, many, many different tenets. So I see Te Wānanga Aotearoa being one of the global leaders within creative practice. Am I missing any questions in the chat? Please feel free to tell me.
Not that I can see, just all the ngā mihi and rawe.
Yes. Kia ora, Griffa, Maree, Tara,
Sasha,
Christina, Sasha. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through them all. Thank you. I really appreciate your tautoko today. The other thing I suppose I just want to leave you with is that if there's anybody here today or anyone that that, is on the verge of thinking that they might want to do rangahau or creative practice rangahau, then I'm going to put in my email here. You could always contact me and I'd be happy to have a kōrero with you about that. If you're a creator and you think to yourself, oh, I'm not a researcher, I couldn't do that, I couldn't do rangahau, I'm here to tell you you're wrong. You can do it. And don't be put off by sometimes Western labels of how a thesis is put together, because we do it differently at Te Wānanga Aotearoa. And the things that you probably already know about yourself and you already know about your practice is in you. And there's no reason why you can't then manifest that into a master's or a PhD. The reason is, why would you want to do that? For me, I know that all I can say is that with my PhD is that I say to people, my brain will never be the same. Okay, when I started my PhD, I had a limited understanding of my practice. I had a limited understanding. I was where I was, right? And my brain was smaller. When I went through doing a PhD and I took the time to really analyze what it was that I was trying to understand about my creative practice, and I delved much more deeply into it, and I gathered all this beautiful knowledge around my practice, and I learnt more, and I was actually able at the end to maybe analyze part of what I was doing. My brain changed, and my brain will never be the same. I am now able to understand my practice better. I'm able to articulate my practice better. I engage with my practice differently than I ever did before I did a PhD. I met a lot of people. I had a lot of tautoko, and it's just kind of catapulted me into a different way of being in the world. that I never had before I did that. So those are my whys. I suppose you've just got to figure out what your whys are.